story of the Sumas and Masqui First Nations, colonially known as Abbotsford, BC. Yeah, for myself, I am a newcomer to Canada. I'm an immigrant from the United States. I live here in Abbotsford with my partner Jess and my son Wendell. We live on a house on a farm. It's very beautiful. It's also quite exposed to climate events, if that makes sense. We don't have air conditioning or central heating. So, and we live right off of a kind of a very deforested, flat plains area. So in the summer, it gets very hot. In the winter, it gets very cold. It's absolutely gorgeous. And I feel very bad about saying bad things about where I live because I'm currently looking at Mount Baker and Mount Chiem, and it's just absolutely gorgeous. But at the same time, it's very exposed to some of these kind of outlier climate catastrophe events. I would say that my favorite part about my community here in Abbotsford, and I would define my community as probably the group that I'm closest to, just in terms socially. My favorite part is that the people that I know here in Abbotsford are all very intentional about, trying to be connected to the land, connected to the Indigenous heritage of land defenders here, even though we're all newcomers. We are not Indigenous ourselves, but we're learning to understand Indigenous wisdom and to amplify Indigenous voices. And yeah, we're actively trying to undermine the white supremacist power structures that are so prevalent in the Fraser Valley, both socially, politically, in our own community spaces. We're a bit, undermanned in that space. Obviously, those are still the dominant power structures, but we're doing what we can, and we have love for each other, and we are all, friends and dealing with life as it comes day by day, and also enjoying the joy of everyday life and their loved ones and friends. That's who I am and where I'm from. Emily?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. It's so good to be with you all here. My name's Emily Lowen. I use she and her pronouns, and I'm calling in from unceded Lekwungen and Wasanich territories and colonially known as Victoria, BC. I grew up here, but I live in Montreal on so-called on Tiohtià:ke territories. But yeah, Victoria is super near and dear to my heart, and the ocean and the forests here. I'm staying in my grandparents' house right now, and we're in a really precious nook of the forest where there's lots of mushrooms in sort of September fall time. Hopefully I'll maybe be able to catch some of that. But I'm thinking of the old fallen maple log that, pretty much every year has a 10-pound lion's mane mushroom that it grows. And yeah, being able to sort of learn so much about this tiny little plot of land that I grew up on is just a continuous gift to keep learning and growing with it. And yeah, I'm really excited to scheme and dream with you all today about the facing the adversity to come this summer, and all that we can do together.
Yeah, and all that we can save together. Absolutely. And I think to sort of launch us into the discussion more, I know that today what brings all of us here together is the shared profound care and love for each other, for our world, for the land, like these places we all call home, as well as this shared outrage, right? As we're watching and experiencing in real time firsthand these extractive, colonial, imperialist, capitalist systems decimating these places that we love. And this is happening at an intensifying speed and scale. So I guess I'd love to like chat first of like, we've kind of grounded in where we call home and what we love about home. But how have our homes, like for each of us, been impacted by extreme weather events? So what's something, if you would like to share with everyone, an experience of an extreme weather event that you lived through and that impacted you in your community? What did you take away from that experience? How has it shaped who you are right now and the work you're doing in climate or land defense work? I'll pass maybe to start with Rainer.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. I would say that the climate event that has been most impactful in my life was the 2021 heat dome. And I know that I'm not the only person here who went through that. And I know that there are probably many people on the call right now who are just beginning their heat dome journey in Ontario, Quebec, Atlantic Canada. But I just wanted to, share my story a little bit in what that was like for me and my family. So 2021 was obviously a fun, interesting, weird time. We were all, 12 plus months into a lockdown that none of us had asked for, that we were all, doing our best to take care of ourselves and be at home. And I think it was over 600 people died during that heat wave. And for my own personal context, I'd lived in Phoenix for multiple years before that. And so I was no stranger to extreme heat. But the fact that BC has almost no preparation for heat like that, and that the homes weren't built with air conditioning, and that the humidity is so high was really, it caught me off guard, to be honest. And so for context, the home that we live in, like I said before, gets unbroken sun all day. There's no shade. We are surrounded by concrete pavement. So it's just really a heat island in the middle of this heat dome. And we were like just thinking, it's hot, it's getting hotter. And then it got to be nighttime, and I remember specifically my partner saying, like, I just cannot sleep in this right now. I can't fall asleep. This is too hot. We actually can't stay here in our house right now. And that was, it's kind of like, I don't know if anybody has ever had any medical emergencies, but it kind of feels like that moment when you switch over from thinking like, I got a little bit injured, to like, oh, I need to go to the hospital, where it's like, oh, something serious is going on right now. And I need to like respond to this. It's an acute moment. And so what ended up happening is that we left our house and went to my in-laws' house to stay in their basement. And that was fine. And then the day after that, we moved into our landlord's RV, which is actually in the garage of the house that we live in. But yeah, it was just very traumatic on top of the trauma of living through the pandemic and the lockdowns. We're still clearly in the pandemic, but different era. But yeah, it was really traumatic to know that we are not okay, and there are other people who are not okay, and we don't have the capacity to help others. We just have to do what's best for us in this moment. And I took away from that experience that this is real, that this is not something that we're talking about our children or our grandchildren starting to experience, but we are the people who are starting to experience the rubber meeting the road of climate change. Like, this is it. We're in climate change now, and it is real, it's serious, and there's no getting away from it. And so some downstream effects of that is that at the time I was working for a tech consulting company whose largest client was a labor organization known as the Christian Labor Association of Canada. Other unions don't necessarily see them as a union. I'll leave that to other people's interpretation. But a lot of their projects that they were working on were like the Site C Dam and the Trans Mountain Pipeline, which from a labor perspective, there's a lot of good jobs in that space. But from a just normal person trying to survive climate breakdown, it's like I can't necessarily bridge the divide in my mind of being concerned about climate and also contributing my labor to these projects or helping facilitate progress on these projects. And so essentially within 2 to 3 months of the heat dome, I had left that job and taken a far lower, actually, no, it was a better paying job that I went to for 2 to 3 months. It wasn't a great job, but essentially my career has kind of taken quite a step back from where I was at that point financially, just because I couldn't continue in that space. So that was the thing that I took away from that.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And yeah, I can hear it in your voice. It still like impacts you to this day. Yeah, maybe I'll pass to Jewel and then to Emily for your stories of what you've lived through in your community.
Just in Lytton alone, like we went through a lot and we're still going through a lot. And I don't think that's just started in 2021 for us, but that was definitely the most extreme it got. So back in June 30th of 2021, we broke Canada's record for the hottest day ever. And it reached 50 degrees just in the town of Lytton. And like some people also recorded 51 degrees and like people who were staying there at the time, like they were talking about like their chickens were like literally passing away in the heat because it was like outside and they just felt like they couldn't escape the heat. And then around 4 p.m. to 5 p.m. A mass wildfire started there, and it actually took our entire community that summer. And yeah, our entire town burnt down that summer. I'm gonna try not to cry. And
okay, take your time.
Yeah. Yeah, it just like thinking back to it, like it literally feels like it was written in a movie because of like everything and like how it went down and like just picturing like everybody like evacuating, like family and like friends and like everybody I knew that lived in the town and like even like picturing what it used to look like before and just like the memories of like people who have like passed on now and like the physical memory of them being in that space as well. And take a deep breath. Yeah, so like just in that moment with the evacuation, like it was kind of like instant. The town was gone within like 30 minutes to an hour. And people went every which way because there's 3 ways you can leave Lytton. And like cell signal was lost immediately. So nobody got the evacuation texts. And so we had people going like door to door, telling like elders to pack their bags, like evacuate. Some people didn't even have time to pack a bag. Like they were just escaping wherever they could. And then just seeing like all the posts on social media of like, did you see this person? Did you see this person? Is this person safe? And then like Facebook actually started this thing that I noticed that summer where it's like check in if you're safe, and that was actually kind of helpful. But yeah, I had never seen it until that moment. So social media became like a really huge thing for us at that time because that was like our only form of communication to see if people were okay. And like some people evacuated to Lillooet, Merritt, Kamloops, and then even some to the coast. or Chilliwack, and it's really hard to like take care of like over 2,000 people from if they're living in all different areas. And yeah, our town is still, it's in the rebuild phase. It's not fully back together. Our closest grocery store is about 40 minutes away. Same with our closest healthcare option. Like Lytton was quite a hub for these things because it was like the biggest community of like the lower Intlakupton. And so we provided like education, healthcare, and groceries for communities upwards of like 40-minute drives to an hour-long drive. And now we don't have those resources anymore. And it really like puts into perspective like just how important these kind of resources are. And like, you know, waking up in the morning and like not being able to just like have a coffee or like if you like cut your finger, then you're like, oh my God, who's gonna drive me? Like how long is it gonna take? And then like, yeah, where's the closest emergency center? And yeah, it just puts your whole life like on a flip. And then not even a year later, also in 2021 in November, we went through the floods. And people don't really like talk about the floods that happened in Lytton, but it like really severely impacted the community on both sides. So there was 3 different spots where the bridges completely collapsed. So people were stuck in Lytton and the only way through was through Lillooet, which adds like an extra hour to your drive. And yeah, so Tank Hill completely washed out, and then Nikamin, their bridge was completely washed out. So then I had family actually stuck on top of a mountain for about like 3 months without being able to get their car over that one bridge. And I had a cousin, she was pregnant at the time, and she had to walk like on the railway bridge just to drive another 2 hours so that she could give birth. And just like super dangerous situation. They were getting like healthcare, like therapists and like groceries helicoptered to them, even though they were like right there. And on the other side of Jackass Mountain, that bridge is still like, it's a one-way now, but that was also fully taken out. And I wasn't able to actually like drive to Lytton for about like 4 months unless it was through Lillooet, which is like, it just feels like such a long drive if you go through that way. It's like so dramatic, but yeah, and just thinking of like the impact of these situations too, like with the floods, like salmon habitat, like both of these rivers are salmon bearing rivers, and like our fishing seasons have definitely suffered from those floods. And as well as like also in the Intlakupton region, Merritt also went through some severe floods as well. And people in Shakin are still not living in their homes yet, because like we literally saw their house get like swept away in the river through like videos. And I couldn't even believe that that was actually happening there, especially after we had like just lost everything in Lytton. So then now there's about 4,000 people evacuated. And like, what do we do in this situation? And just thinking of the impact to the animals, the trees, the water, and the displacement of peoples and like their mental health, like with animals, like where are they supposed to go when there's fires and floods? There's not that many places for them to go. For trees and tree diversity, like yeah, I talked to like a few different groups about like just the tree diversity and like, is there any use for these trees? Because the Lytton fire got up to 83,000 hectares that summer. And if there's 83,000 hectares of trees that are seemingly unusable now, like I don't know. There has been studies done, like you could use the burnt trees for building, and like it would actually be stronger, but just the cost of having to do that is like far too much. But it is like some type of science I would be interested in. And then just thinking of water, and like, so in Lytton we have a ranch, and this ranch, we have a creek, and this creek feeds 3 other ranches. And so since like 2021, we have not been able to produce any field of hay because of the drought caused from the fire. So this creek has survived now 3 fires. And the fact that anything's coming down out of it is like very shocking. But yeah, definitely not enough to provide actual like hay for the horses anymore. We've had to actually buy hay for the past few years for our horses. And yeah, we could clean the ditch out as many times as we want, but we need like actual funding and like resources to actually fix it, and so water's actually coming through. And then at the time of the fire, I personally quit my job here in Kamloops and moved to Hope to help with the evacuees, because I just couldn't picture myself like going to my 9 to 5 regularly while like my peoples were going through this, and like I was going through it. And I just couldn't be around people who weren't impacted by it anymore. And because I just had so much like going on in my head, and I just felt like so much anger about the situation. And yeah, so I moved to Hope for the summer, and then like it really taught me that like our people are a lot closer than we may think at times. And I feel like the fire like really brought us together, and like gave us a sense of being able to rely on others as well. And like my summer working for the Emergency Operations Center for Lytton just showed me like how I don't want to be like out of the same stuff, but like it was like bad. The resources we were given was not enough to what we needed to take care of 2,000 people. And it just taught me like, wow, like First Nations groups are, you know, running on the bare minimum to deal with these crises and like environmental disaster, evacuations, and then yeah, just really opened my eyes up to it, and like how youth in the situation of environmental disaster are not even thought of at all. And they're just kind of like brought wherever, and there's like no support for them at all. And yeah, there's very minimal like mental health care as well in these situations. And it's not great when somebody's brought in, like somebody you don't know, and then they're there to talk to you about it, and you're like, okay, well, you weren't impacted by this, and I don't know you. And I just like don't feel safe enough to talk to you about what's going on. And so like the mental health care support we had come in like just wasn't successful enough. And then like also for our emergency operations, we had about 3 people working in it. So it was me and 2 other people, and one of the people in this group had lost their home. And so and then all the rest were chief and council, who had also, some of them had lost their homes as well. And so like we were just running on like gas pretty much at this point, like just running on adrenaline. And then like different groups would come in, like Red Cross, EMBC, government, and they would come in for the max amount of 14 days. And so in these 14 days, they come and help with your emergency operations center, and then they leave. And then you have to tell somebody else who comes in next everything you need, and like everything that happened. And then they're also trying to learn more about the situation. And so it's really like repetitive and draining to have that, and like not having like a steady person to be there with you in that time of crisis. But yeah, I guess more on the takeaways was that. And then it also made me think of policies and disaster management. This moment was like kind of a catalyst in my own like career in education, where I began to look more into like climate research. And I have one paper that's getting published of the environmental impacts of the railway in Lytton First Nations. And then I also did the Canadian Institute of Health and Research. Me and another one of my coworkers, my friends, she worked with me on this, and we did research around the Secwepemc area of how people were impacted by climate change and COVID-19. And we interviewed over 40 people for this. And just like opening my eyes to policy as well. I had not even thought about policy before the fire had happened. I knew like what I was feeling and what my community was going through, but I didn't know like how we can actually like help these things in like a real level.
Totally. Yeah, and if I could jump in there, yeah, thank you so much, Joel. And like I think on the policy, I'm so sorry to stop you there, but first off, I wanted to thank you and Rainer for like, I know it's so difficult to speak about these things, so I want to acknowledge that that's not lost on us and on the audience, that it's such a gift to have you share this with us today, and we really appreciate it, and we know how much of a weight it is on you, so we're really grateful for that. And your testimony and what you continue to live through, that this is not by any means over. If I could, yeah, I wanted to maybe invite Emily to maybe take up a bit of that piece on policy and sort of kind of shift maybe a bit of the conversation to, okay, this is what's happening on the ground in our communities, in our homes. But then we've got the government and their, the lack of action at speed and at scale necessary, and there needing to be a stronger climate justice movement in allyship with Indigenous land defenders in order to create this livable, just, decolonized world that we absolutely need and that we have a right to. So maybe I'll invite Emily to like chat a bit about that policy, what's happening, sort of zooming out at the like federal level right now in terms of what's going on.
Yeah. Thank you both again for being so vulnerable and sharing such impactful stories. I really appreciate it. In terms of the federal state of play, so as the fall 2025 federal election approaches, I think all of this past year, we've seen more and more directed attacks and really like corny political theater to weaponize climate policy and shore up votes. We're seeing increasingly, particularly from Poilievre and the Conservative Party, the binary between climate and affordable life and living as being seen as mutually exclusive. So we've seen that most prominently this year through Poilievre's Axe the Tax campaign, which you may have run into. And it, yeah, by and large, through a number of wrenches into federal climate policy discourse this year. And in large part, I've seen it as an effort to entrench climate policy as this cost that's unaffordable to Canadians, and and to continue this rhetoric of individualism, where we have the weight of climate action falling most heavily on working class individuals, instead of asking big polluters to pull their weight, or having a really effective sustainable jobs program. And I'm thinking of that Sustainable Jobs Act piece because we did see the Sustainable Jobs Act pass today. So it went through the Senate and that moved forward, which is an important step, but of course with many shortcomings from what we actually need to see on the ground. So yeah, so it did feel like last fall and this spring in particular, the carbon tax debacle, if I may, really like overwhelmed news cycles. But I think that like one of the most important federal climate policy battlegrounds this year is a cap on oil and gas emissions, which is asking big polluters to step up and pull their weight finally. Essentially, it means that the federal government would decide how much each individual facility can pollute free of charge based on their production and their emissions intensity. And so, yeah, with the proposed cap, the federal government hopes to reduce pollution in line with Canada's 2030 climate targets of reducing 40 to 45% of its emissions from 2005 levels. Yeah, and just to compare, we've seen other industries such as electricity have relative success in reducing their GHG emissions, whereas surprise, surprise, the oil and gas industry continues to be the largest source of pollution and isn't following through on its voluntary pollution commitments. So in terms of where we're at, there was a big push for the government to release a framework on the emissions cap during COP28. But this is really, it's just a teaser. We need actual rules, we need actual regulation before an election. And so, yeah, in terms of the timeline, we'd need that first draft by early fall to legally like lock in some of these rules and do more safeguarding and future proofing before the election season takes foot. So yeah, really like zooming out, I do see like this cap as being a particularly strong federal lever on the table to challenge the power of big oil and more materially hold them accountable to our targets. From a jurisdiction standpoint, the federal government can't actually regulate production like the provinces can, but they can regulate emissions or pollution. Sort of a spicy footnote to that is that just today, Deloitte released a report saying that it's unlikely that many companies would deploy carbon capture and storage as it's quite economically unviable in an effort to comply with an emissions cap. And they'd instead be forced to curtail production. So of course, this is like a funny side of the coin because the environmentalists are cheering internally. But yeah, this was a report commissioned by the government of Alberta to justify the constitutional issues of an oil and gas emissions cap. So yeah, this fight has been a really wild ride, and I really love how much energy big oil is expending to fight this regulation. I think that means you're doing something right when the executives are consistently throwing public tantrums around it. Like just a couple weeks ago, the Environment Committee, 5 big oil CEOs testified on their record profits and rising emissions. And they were really called to bat, and MPs were demanding answers on why the oil CEOs are lobbying against this cap. And there were shrugs in return. And I think this speaks to a larger dynamic politically in terms of the Canadian Association of Petroleum Producers playing more of an outside game with the Liberal government and sending in the Pathways Alliance, which is sort of the greenwashed alternative to that in order to shore up more subsidy dollars and sort of maintain this green leadership in image while appeasing a number of their sort of Albertan stakeholders. So yeah, we see this sort of manifested through a number of like ad campaigns across BC and Ottawa, and yeah, essentially, this remaining runway that we have with the emissions cap and really a number of other regulations will be essential in order to effectively demonize big oil and carve out more political space to hold them accountable. But yeah, that's a little bit of an overview where we're at in the federal context.
Yeah. Yeah, thank you so much for that really brief, but like, yeah, great dive into it. And I think, yeah, I guess for this next part of the conversation, like trying to like pull these two things together, right? Of yeah, what we've got from the lived experiences of like Rainer and Jewel and how they've like expressed like what the incredible crisis that they've lived through, and that how that is fueled by runaway fossil fuel emissions by these companies, these CEOs, this industry acting with impunity. And how can we as a movement meet this moment and create the power we need at the community level and beyond to leverage these moments of crisis into moments of action. So that's like my second question, or my next question here is, you know, as like Jewel was just talking about so beautifully and so devastatingly, like these moments of disaster shine these lights on these deep inequalities in society, right? So that there's First Nations peoples, Indigenous peoples on their, on their land or elsewhere, that there is these contradictions in support, that they're not being the right amount of support. You were talking about youth not being supported, other vulnerable groups not having enough mental health care, not having just the physical like hospitals and like medical care needed for those moments, because these intense moments of disaster have wrecked this infrastructure that was already just the bare minimum. So I want to, maybe chat next about folks on this call's experience, how have we, but then there also being these moments of opening. And Jewel, you also mentioned a bit about how much your community came together through this incredibly intense moment of crisis, an extended moment of crisis. So how do we, how can we bring these two things together? How can we maybe bring mutual aid and community organizing, community support and care in the wake of these disasters? How can we make them into, durable, anti-racist, anti-fascist work in our communities, so that we can build these better systems and communities of care right now? So maybe I'll pass, either Rainer or Jewel to start. Maybe I'll pass to Jewel. Sorry, I'll take a.
Yeah. What comes to mind when I think of this is some of the work that one of the youth in my community has already been doing. Her name is Patashi Pims. She's done a lot of work with youth in the community, and she's put a lot of effort in towards youth after the fire. And she's actually found funding to get a youth building put in Lytton, and she spent like a whole year on this project, and just having to deal with like all the little things that come with it, the little nuances. And I really commend her for what she's done for us in the community, and like just having little gatherings for the youth, and little dinners where she cooks everything. And she's like younger than me, and I'm like, wow, like she's just cool. And her and her sister, and and just the work like a lot of the community has done towards researching more about like even the things we have on the land. So after the fire, we've done a lot of research on rattlesnakes and the importance and how they're impacted. And we're actually having like a little thing in July about rattlesnakes to talk to the community about it. One thing I did want to highlight about wildfire that my cousin Sharisa has done is be a cultural monitor in terms of archaeology. So like a lot of times in wildfire, like we just let the fires burn through. You can't really stop where they're going to go. But in 2022 and 2023, there was fires over on the west side of Lytton, which impacted the Stein. And the Stein is this huge cultural mountain that is provincially protected. And there's so much archaeology in this park. So just the fact that like a wildfire was even near it, it really worried people. And so she became a cultural monitor, and she was identifying cultural or CMTs, culturally modified trees, pictographs, and just telling firefighters where they can build fire guards and put sprinklers, and so we can protect these places that are important to us. And she's really pushed for other communities to have their own archaeologists on sites of wildfires for this as well. And yeah, just commending like our own leadership in Lytton as well, and our rebuild council, or our rebuild directors as well. They're looking for the most sustainable ways to build housing again, which ways are going to be best for a place that gets the hottest in Canada and is really susceptible to wildfire. Yeah, and they're just trying new things out and seeing where it works, and really pushing for fuel management in the area as well, and hiring locals for firefighting as well. And yeah, I'm doing like a couple different projects with my work as well, in terms of like emergency response, but yeah, it's been like a really long journey. Like it's been 3 years, going on 3 years since that fire happened, and we're still learning new things every day about it. And things move slower in some areas, and sometimes they move really fast. And yeah, I think it's learning on both behalf of the communities and the government as well.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And everything you were saying was fascinating, and just really, especially like that cultural, like the archaeology piece of like what it means to like care for in really intentional ways, like your relationship to the land, your wanting to guard that knowledge and make sure that there's ways that we can safeguard that, and also how it interacts with, you were saying, different ways of like, the fighting the fires and knowing where to put certain things or not, or just having this like deep knowledge that is maintained and protected despite like the damage. Yeah, that's amazing. Yeah, Raynard, for you, how do you maybe approach these moments of potentially as openings for better futures and for fighting, using these sort of moments of crisis for an opening to fighting for a better world?
Yeah, I thank you, Sarah, and thank you, Joel, both for your contribution here today, and also just for the work that you do every day. Yeah, I've found that it's really hard to do work in the moments of crisis and emergency, because those are the times when you really have to care about what's right in front of you. And what's really most important is what you do afterwards, and what you do in preparation for the next moments when things get really bad. And obviously in the moment when there are climate emergencies, when there are heat domes, you take into account your capacity and your bandwidth and the resources that you have in front of you, and the network that you have in your community, and try and orient yourself to the people who are the most marginalized in your community, to try and find if there are any unhoused communities that are all grouped together, and see if you can bring them water or shade with umbrellas. Obviously, mutual aid is an emergency triage strategy for those kinds of situations. That's can make a huge difference for somebody who's just in desperate need. And what I've found really helps me in the downtimes between those moments of acute crisis are searching out cultural influences that encourage you to dream of better futures. Not necessarily like disconnected from reality, utopia and futures, but stories that take into account what we're facing, but also define what's coming, not as an era necessarily of pure loss, but of one that's change. And that, you know, we're living in an era where we're still seeing a massive amount of destruction ongoing in an unsustainable way. And to take hope that an unsustainable system by definition can't go on forever is really nice. To know that like the oil and gas industry someday will not be doing what it is today, one way or another. And our job is to make that happen in a way where we're taking care of people who will be hurt by the oil and gas industry, continuing to press ahead in light of the fact that we know all of these things about climate change and ecological breakdown. But on top of that, you know, insert yourself into local power structures and organizations where decisions are made, you know, good faith infiltration into political spaces where you can have influence. You know, your voice matters. Our voices all collectively matter. And we are important people in our communities, and to insert ourselves into systems that may seem and in actuality be broken is still very important, because those are spaces where we can affect change. And it may not be the change that we need, but it may be better than what would exist if we weren't there. And so an example of that would be that I've gotten fairly involved with the BC NDP since the leadership race a couple of years ago. And the BC NDP is a primary example of a not perfect organization that also happens to do some pretty good things, and also does some pretty bad things too. But the reality is, if we're not showing up, somebody else is showing up. And if we're not contributing our voices and our important insight into these spaces in our local communities, then the people who will show up are the people who are very power hungry, who are driven by capital, who are driven by greed. And they're going to dominate the conversation in our place, right? So especially in municipal and provincial spaces that are supposedly on the progressive left, if we're not showing up in those spaces, then who is? And we need to be there, even if we don't 100% agree with everything that's going on in those spaces. And I'd also encourage people to just bring your skill set, bring yourself into spaces where other people are congregating. You don't have to know exactly what you're doing when you get there. And you don't have to start something on your own. Add your voices to the groups that are already existing, that are already doing good work, and just show up and ask what needs to be done. You know, I know it's a really big tripping point for people, especially people who are millennial white guys like myself, that we just want to jump in and start a thing. We want to be the person that solves the problem. But 9.5 times out of 10, other people are already doing the work, and you just need to show up. And you know, if you're an accountant, you don't have to be the person with a bullhorn showing up at a climate rally getting arrested. You could just be an accountant for the group that is doing good work. You could be the person that shows up and just paints signs. Like, and I've spent a couple of years in spaces with groups that are doing work, and honestly, those are the places where the need is greatest. Just bodies to show up, people to do boring work. Everybody wants to be an activist, to break down the doors, but nobody wants to do the like boring work. So we need an army of people to do the boring administrative bureaucratic work to get us over the end lines and to amplify voices of Indigenous and BIPOC and women identifying peoples to really like build the foundation for change that we need. Because in the short and medium term, just looking at Canada and our political spaces, like our federal politics right now aren't perfect, and they're probably going to get a lot worse in the medium term. But understanding that, we also need to build the foundation for what comes next. You know, a Poilievre government may be pretty awful, but we need the people who are going to build out of that to be the people who are going to be the voices to let the electorate know 4 years after the election that like there is a very viable, very popular, very amazing government that could be formed in the 2029 election. And so let's get excited about that. Let's start working on that. I mean, it's going to be pretty brutal in the short term, but you know, we're working for you know, from an Indigenous perspective, the next 7 generations are what we should be focusing on. So the next election is just like that, and let's focus on long-term stuff here. Let's build some strong foundations.
Yeah, thank you, Rainer. And like, yeah, I think like you're really echoing like this Mariam Kaba, like as well as this, in this longer view of like of how do we make this longer term change over time possible and be invested in that fight on a long term sort of like échelle or like scale. And then this Mariam Kaba sort of way of thinking of, okay, people are on the ground now, get connected with them, find your people. And all the people on this call, I think mostly are those people who are finding those things, either leading those things or creating those groups. And I guess is my final question before we go to a Q&A. What are you most excited about in the work that you're doing right now, to maybe share with folks on the call what you're doing in your community at this moment? What do you need support with? How can people show up? And what is exciting you right now about the next few steps in your work? Maybe I'll pass to Jewel first.
Yeah, for my own personal work, this is more of like a dream right now, more than like the work that's actually been put into it. But I really want to have an outdoor basketball court in Lytton for the whole community, because basketball is like a huge part of our community. In BC, we have this thing called Junior All Native and All Native, and it's like over 80 teams of youth going to this tournament. And so our youth get really excited about these tournaments, and they train all year round. Same with our adult teams, they train all year round for this one tournament. And having an outdoor court with like actual sun coverage in this in Lytton is like so important. And I think it would really get people outside. And yeah, because I got a wicked sunburn last summer from playing basketball outside. Not so much fun. But yeah, that's like a personal goal that I'm manifesting. And yeah, I can't wait for the houses to be rebuilt. The last one I saw, I think there was windows on it when I last drove through. Yeah, and I can't wait for everybody to move back into their new homes and just see the new town and its rebirth. And yeah, the town of Lytton's actually burnt down probably 5 times now in its entire history. So it keeps going through these rebirth phases. And yeah, so not our first time coming back from one of these. And I hope that our community has more supports and little things we can do in the community, like basketball and having that youth center. Yeah, there is like one thing I thought of as well, just in terms of like the past questions, if I could add that in as well, was just like, so when a fire like that happens, they do a bus tour, like for community members directly after, so that they could see what was impacted and who lost their homes. So on this bus tour, literally 2 buses full of people are allowed. And then the sign up sheet which was with our regional district, anybody could have signed up. And so I actually went through this list and skimmed out people who weren't from community. And I told the regional district, I was like, nope, not allowed. But then the regional district promised me that these people would be taken care of in terms of mental health supports on the site, because I was like, this is going to be a really traumatic thing that they're going to go through. And they're going to be the first of the community to see it, because as soon as people evacuated, there was like only a few pictures online of it. We didn't know what was lost yet. Like, I didn't know if I lost my house or if it was still there till a week after the fire. So we went a whole week guessing if it was still there or not. And yeah, so then they brought these people on the bus tour, didn't tell them how many times they'd be going through, didn't actually have any cultural or mental health support. And I think they just gave these people like water and maybe a sandwich, and yeah, and then they dropped them off at home. And there's nothing really like set in place for them. And a lot of them said like they felt kind of like sheep in that moment, because they're like, get on the bus, we're gonna drive through. And then they didn't know they were driving through a second time. So then it was like reliving it all, and they felt like really like just kind of like out of body in that moment. And like I felt really bad because I was kind of I was a part of this, and like I felt like I was given no control at all over it. And like I tried to help, but then I wasn't allowed to, because of the regional district and like their power instead of our own power. Yeah, and that was something that really bothered me. And because this happens in other communities that go through these kind of extreme environmental impact, that was something that I wanted to actually be taken care of.
Totally. Yeah, and like it's been so important, like how much from your like what you've been saying about how important like cultural and mental health supports are for communities going through this, how like a lack of that is like so so deeply like secondarily damaging to going through something like this and not being adequately supported. And then also having like finding your own power versus that regional district and what that could look like in terms of self-determination and governance, and like that power to determine, yeah, your own future in the way that your community will rebuild from these ashes. So thank you so much for sharing that. Rainer, if I could ask you, what's exciting to you about the work you're doing this summer and beyond?
Yeah, well, as I mentioned, I am involved with the BC NDP. For better or worse, they definitely have quite a few flaws. But as a highlight of just the importance of getting involved, the executive or the electoral district association executive that I'm a part of is small, and so we were able to get a really good nominee for the election coming up. So I'm going to work on that. And on top of that, I've been involved with a group called Common Horizon, or in Quebec, Horizon Commune. And we're doing quite a lot of work for, at this point, campaigning for an excess profits tax, which is one of those things where politically it seems radical until you start talking about the reality on the ground. And then it's just like, well, obviously this is something we need to have, because we have a much higher need for public services at this point, obviously, with climate emergencies than we really ever have. And we have infrastructure that's been bearing the brunt of multiple decades of neoliberal divestment and privatization and breakdown, that we also need to catch up on the debt from that we've been accruing. And so we have all of these billionaires who have, since the beginning of the pandemic, really been waging this campaign of wealth redistribution. And I know that that's a phrase that conservatives love to throw around in the face of any sort of social program, but we really are seeing an aggressive campaign of wealth redistribution from working class and middle class people into the billionaire class ever since the beginning of the pandemic. And our neoliberal government policies are really facilitating that and bending to that. And we need to be very active in trying to add our voices to movements where we're creating this new common sense that that's not okay. We need to break the cultural hegemony of Reaganism and Thatcherism and this idea that investing in trickle-down economics and the growth of big business and the ever-expanding, exponential growth of our GDP is really central to our well-being. We need to break that, common sense that our culture has, where that's just taken as truth, and really recenter the fact that we need the government to take care of people right now. And in order to pay for that, the most common sense way to do that is to have an excess profits tax on billionaires and corporations that are making a ton of money at our own expense. Yeah, so that's one way that I've been getting involved, that I would encourage other people to get involved, is to really focus on fighting against this wealth redistribution campaign to the billionaire class.
Yeah, thank you so much for that introduction to Common Horizons work for folks who maybe want to get involved or want to learn more. Maybe I'll invite you to share in the chat some more info if there's like a Facebook page or something to follow. But I'd also love for folks on this call, as we just about to wrap up, but we have a few more minutes. If you are doing something in your community this summer and would like to share that with the folks here on this call today, we'd love to see it in the chat. So if you're doing some work, I know there's lots of other groups that are also doing really incredible work around mobilizing around extreme weather events and beyond. So we'd love to hear from you too. And if you want to share, we can amplify the campaigns, the actions, the mutual aid that you are doing this summer. And just before opening up to questions, I wanted to just say that, a little bit about what Dave Donnacona is doing on the lands of the Nahiro-Wizu in so-called Quebec, so-called Quebec. So this is an association of land defenders, hereditary chiefs, matriarchs, and community members who are living on their non-ceded territory and are fighting and actively protecting their territory against deforestation and the robbing, the invasion of their land by industrial logging companies. So these land defenders are demanding decision-making power over the forestry operations happening on their own unceded land, as well as the redistribution of revenue generated from said sort of operations. And they're doing this ongoing struggle that has been going on for years. They need support in their fight for self-determination. And there is a group of settler allies that's put together a document under sort of helping explain their struggle and the exact demands that the nation and the sort of group, the association, is demanding. So I'll drop that in the chat in a moment, but you can also give them a follow, and they have a request for donations on their Facebook page if you want to learn more and support. With that, I think we can take 2 questions from the audience if folks want to put up their hand or drop a question in the chat. Okay, amazing. Seeing some scan folks on this call. Amazing. Thanks everyone for sharing. Do we have any questions for our wonderful panelists this evening? Yeah, actually, we are kind of, yes, we've got Ash to Action, Last Generation, amazing. They're doing some work in so-called Montreal, so-called Ottawa this summer, mobilizing around wildfires and extreme weather events. So please, follow what they're doing and see if you can join. It's sort of a coalition of groups doing work and pulling together. But yeah, I have a question in the chat about a mutual aid toolkit and the grants. So I might, because we're running a little bit low on time, move to that as we sort of close out today's gathering. What we're doing with the hub is we want to support you in doing work like what Jewel is doing and what Rainer is doing in your own communities by dreaming up what mutual aid, community emergency response, and sort of building collectives of care could look like on the ground in your hometown, as well as what it could look like to also support you in creating grassroots actions, events, sort of pushing and creating this sort of this pressure from coast to coast at a grassroots level for the kinds of policy and beyond sort of change that we need to get to the root causes of the crisis we're in and fight for the just future we deserve. So we have a toolkit that we're really excited to be sharing with you today in the sort of 1.0 version. Which is, we'll drop a few in the links to it in the chat. But basically, it's sort of an ideas sort of base and resource list, and also sort of a walking through of what you could do with the microgrants that we will be launching this summer to support groups, both new and seasoned, on the ground with the kind of work you're doing to do mutual aid, as well as kind of spearhead events in your community that put the pressure on targets in your community to work towards real climate policy, real justice, and real policy with an equity lens and beyond. So with this toolkit, we really hope to spark ideas for action. With the money, we really want to help you sort of grants of under $2,000 to help you have the resources you need to make those ideas, both mutual aid and action, a reality. And we have Leonard, who is our wonderful active listening support in the breakout room, and who is also our microgrants coordinator, who will be spearheading this project and being there as a liaison and a support person for you to think through, okay, what can I do with when I access this money? What can I do with the ideas sort of outlined in the toolkit? How can I bring this to life in my community? So we have this support on hand to make sure that you feel that you've got enough energy and action and ideas and resources to make that work in your community a reality. So we're really excited to be launching this. We're going to be launching the portal for the microgrants in the next couple of weeks. So we'll be blasting out a newsletter soon with more details. But in the meantime, we have this first version of the toolkit ready for you to take a look at to understand more about mutual aid and action, what you could do this summer. And then we'll be helping with all these the microgrant resources very, very soon. So with that, I'd love to launch a little poll and see who's interested in maybe taking some of this on this summer, getting some of these resources, and what we can most help you with when it comes to getting this stuff off the ground. So it'd be really lovely if folks could take a moment to just answer a few questions about what kinds of support would be most helpful to you. What are the barriers and what can we help you get out of the way so you can be most effective and strategic? As we end the call and people take a look at those questions, do we have any last sort of thoughts, parting thoughts from the audience? Seeing so many actions people are sharing in the chat. Thank you so much. We'd also love if everyone on this call will get the recording afterwards, but also we'd love if you wanted to drop in the chat. Leonard can send his email if you want to email him directly to ask questions about the microgrants program. But also you can drop your email in the chat if you'd like us to do a direct follow-up to help you access these resources when they've fully been launched.
Yeah, if I can just say a few words about that.
Yes,
if you can leave your email and your name, that would be wonderful, just so I can do a follow-up with everyone giving updates about the toolkit. So as Sarah said, my role will really be like to support support groups. Sorry, it's been a long day. To support groups, either would be on a logistical level, or also like to see with you what could be a strategy and to like brainstorm about your project. So I'll have a lot of time to really support groups on the field and see with you what are your needs, and like I can also do research about subjects if you need to. So really feel free to reach out to the email address. It's in the chat, and otherwise I'll keep you posted about the next updates on this program. So thanks everyone.
Sorry, muted. Thanks so much, Leonard. We have a question from Vincent.
Hi, everyone. Thank you to everyone who participated in the panel. It was really interesting to see it from everyone's perspective, see the issue from everyone's perspective. I'm wondering how, or if you guys have any tips about how to go about having a conversation with people around you. You know, how do you get people to connect the extreme weather events and the climate, and get the ball rolling, because it has to be a grassroots movement. We have to have lots of people participating. It's, you know, I'm sure everyone knows how exhausting it can be to try to lead one of those movements. So we need a lot of participation, and I have witnessed and, you know, have read about this kind of silence about climate change. I don't know if the word translates well in English, but in French it's omerta. It's kind of, I think it's something that's out of like mafia, like, you know, something you just don't talk about. So I don't know if you guys have a word to say about how you try to get the ball rolling, try not to offend people. I don't know if you have your thoughts about that.
Yeah, thanks so much. Would anyone like to take that?
I can take a stab at it. Yeah, I think when I think back to last year, there was like this wild proliferation of like right-wing arson conspiracy, even to the point of actually climate activists setting the fires just to, you know, raise alarm bells about climate action. And I think that what that tells me is that people are desperate for easy answers in scary times. And from, yeah, a messaging standpoint, I think what we can expect is like boilerplate from conservatives and other figures is, well, honestly, probably across the political spectrum, is that yeah, this is sloppy humans, you know, setting fires, don't worry, you know, climate will be out of the frame. Like that's sort of the status quo attempt in messaging right now, and some will be tying it to arson. But they'll argue that climate solutions and talking about it at this time is a distraction, and that, you know, we need more funding for first responders, which is 100% true. But, you know, it's not a and/or situation. So in terms of messaging, I like to think of it in terms of more of a phased approach, because you don't want to go into communities who are experiencing disaster with like a political message. You know, like there's so many levels of wrong there. So I do think of it in terms of like, you know, a before, during, and after phase. So in terms of before, I think it's really important to use this time to foreshadow events, you know, to build up these like preemptive mutual aid systems and build our own internal capacities to show up and be making those plans. But then also like starting to seed that connection to root causes and big polluters and others. And some of those linking messages can be, you know, if you're talking to like family members, it could be something like burning fossil fuels causes climate change, and climate change is causing more frequent, more costly, and more deadly forest fires year after year. And if we want to stop these wildfires, we have to act on climate change. You know, it feels annoying, but we do have to go back to basics when we're like seeding these events. Just, yeah, especially reflecting on how warped the narrative was last year, in particular. And yeah, other things in terms of like all these important efforts that we make to prepare our communities, to invest in our fire services, and to better manage our forests will be lost if we go backwards on climate. And yeah, in terms of the during phase, thinking about, yeah, really that's obviously our time to be focusing on, you know, passing the mic to those most impacted who want a platform to speak about their experiences, and just being the, you know, shouldering the labor and doing that sort of mutual aid organizing in community. I do think of a slightly pronged approach here in terms of, yeah, direct fire zones and the more smoky urban centers that are maybe further from the fires. You know, maybe in those regions, it's we could opt for more creative outlets to bring people into the movement and release climate rage and anxiety. Maybe it could be, yeah, canvassing and handing out like asthma puffers that say like air quality sponsored by big oil. I don't know. I'm just I'm making up stuff here. But then afterwards, as I said in the chat, this is really a time to, yeah, connect with community and start doing that sort of sense making collectively, and be piecing together these root cause solutions. And so, yeah, I think it's a really important time to take stock with those who have capacity to do so. And yeah, I'll stop it there because we're at time. But.
Yeah. No, thank you so much. Thank you for that question, and thank you for that answer, Emily. I know we didn't hear from you a bit earlier on that, so really glad we could get that in. So we're at time. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been such an honor to gather with you all. It's been first and foremost such an honor to hear from Rainer and Jewel about your lived experience through these intense and acute moments of crisis that in so many ways have not ended, and that continue to have these afterlives that completely structure the ways that you're living now. And I'm really grateful to have everyone else on this call to share with us in this. And we really hope that you move forward and keep getting support from us at the Hub in terms of what we can do next to turn these moments of crisis into opportunity for action. So thank you for joining us. I'm really grateful to have you here. And this is just the beginning of a conversation and of what we need to do to strengthen the climate justice movement and beyond together. So thank you for being here. And we hope to talk to you all very soon.
Just to let you all know, I collected all the email address, so there will be a follow-up about this, so no worries.
Thanks for having me.
Yes, thank you so much.
Stem.